there was an attempted coup, I guess you could say.
Is that the right word?
The union.
Kind of, I guess.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, they Bruce Meyer, who was the lead negotiator in the most recent CBA negotiation, some players looked to oust him.
AJ in sunny Sarasota, Florida, next to our good friend Hannah Kaiser. And this is perfect because, hi, Hannah, great to see you. AJ always tries to get me kicked out of the hosting chair, so why not start with a person who has actually filled in for me, and AJ has put the numbers on the board and said, wow, our show's getting a lot more views and listens today with Hannah on board. I'm all about it, though. I like it, Hannah. It's awesome to have you and be back with all four of us on together. How are you?
I'm good. Well, Scott, your job is safe because I have a flight to catch, so I can't do the whole 2 hours. So they're going to have to keep you around at least through today.
Ha ha, AJ. Ha ha. All right, so then let's charge them out and get right
Joke's
into
on
it.
you,
So, Hannah. Hey, I'm happy. I'm here. Let's charge them out so Hannah can hit her flight. And we will start with the most relevant news of the past 24 hours. We might go a few shows finally without talking about Blake Snell after today or tomorrow, because we've spoken about him for like 4 months, wondering when he's going to sign. So, Hannah, when you finally saw that news break yesterday, what did you think?
I thought Blake Snell must be like, what more could I possibly do? I turned in a Cy Young season to get what is essentially a 1-year deal. I mean, I know it's 2 years and there's an opt-out, but I know that at this point we expected it. It's so late. It's so close to opening day. This is what the other Boras clients took, some version of this. But for Snell in particular, you're coming off your second Cy Young season. Don't you think, like, I've done everything, now the agent should be able to turn this into some kind of job security?
Hey, watch out. Be careful now, because Scott Boras will blackball you and not ever speak to you. If you say mean things about him, like he didn't get every client $300 million. If
that's what he's using as his standard for blackballing people this offseason, there's going to be a lot of reporters he doesn't talk to anymore, because I think I think that's the general consensus.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, he took an L. He took an L this offseason, AJ, right?
We've talked about it. Listen, Scott Boras is the most, I don't know, I don't want to say the best, because every person thinks their agent is the best, right? But he is the most famous agent. He's the one that everybody, especially in baseball, when you're talking about baseball, everyone's like, oh, Scott Boras, Scott Boras, Scott Boras. And he has a lot of power in the game. You talk to people, they'll say he's one of the most powerful people in baseball because of his client list. And this year, for whatever reason, whether it was the market, whether it was the teams involved, the players involved, he just didn't get the bags that he's used to getting. And nobody seems to know why, but he'll spin it the way he wants to spin it. But Blake Snell signed, sealed, delivered. He'll be in Scottsdale, I'm sure, probably today or tomorrow, and he'll be ready to chuck the ball for the Giants soon.
And that gives them a great 1-2 for their rotation.
Right?
So for the Giants, if you're a Giants fan, this is incredible news.
Yeah, and Hannah, there's reinforcements too along the way for the Giants. I mean, stuff-wise, their rotation is as good as any now, right? Yeah, like you mentioned, you've got the Snell-Webb 1-2, and Kyle Harrison's got a lot of stuff and kind of can take a lot of pressure off of him. Jordan Hicks is converted to a starter. How about some of the guys that are coming through later on this season? I mean, Robbie Wright won a Cy Young Award a few years back. He might look good in August. Alex Cobb coming back in a couple months. Do you think the Giants are a playoff team now?
Are you asking me? Or
You're asking you.
Oh,
I answered this last night.
Oh no! What did you say? I want
to. I said. Well, the Phillies, Braves, the Central winner, and then there's 3 teams coming out of the West. So it's Dodgers, Diamondbacks, Padres, Giants are the 4 for 3 spots. And I think the Giants, just with this signing, moved ahead of the Padres. So I think they're going to get in.
You're counting out the Mets entirely. You're like, there's no chance.
Pretty much, yeah.
You're
and
right.
The Marlins.
I like that. I do. I think that breakdown makes it look pretty good for the Giants. Which in some ways makes me think, man, maybe the Mets should have done this, because would that have put them in the Giants spot? I think you're right. I think the rotation for the Giants, it worked for the Rangers last year, this kind of second wave of reinforcement pitchers that they brought in at the deadline. The Rangers are running back that same plan. I think you do have to have this first half rotation, second half rotation, and the first half rotation got better and the second half rotation looks pretty good. I think you're right. I think just the numbers say the Giants have a pretty good chance of making the postseason.
Here's the problem with the Mets, your favorite Mets. They're missing their number one starter for
I know.
at least until June, if not later.
I know. I'm sure you guys talked about this, but I don't know why they didn't go out and sign. Well, they could still sign Montgomery, but when Kodai Senga went down, it's like, now what are you doing? Because I like the Luis Severino signing. I like the Sean Manaea signing. But even if those break right, you're still missing the top of the rotation.
They're taking a step back this year. They're clear. I mean, if you're not going in that direction for more pitching, it's not a playoff rotation, you know? The other part, I was looking at comps here, Kratz. Sonny Gray ended up getting more money than Blake Snell. I know it's over 3 years versus 2, but he got $75 million guaranteed, 3 years older than him, than the Cy Young winner. You know, Ken wrote a great article last night about all the comps and just adding things up. I mean, Lee, who was part of a great offseason for the Giants, Soler, obviously Chapman earlier, you mentioned Hicks, Ray in the trade, but Lee alone, who's going to be in center field for them, the rookie, got what, $3 million less guaranteed than Chapman and Snell combined. Who had that one on their bingo card?
Absolutely not. And maybe they overpaid for him. Maybe they were just going all in, like I said last night, on the pitching and defense in a park where it doesn't really matter. You just have to be able to put the ball in play. Maybe they're going to strike out less this year. And they're like, you know what? We got Soler. If there's one person on the planet that can hit the ball out of here, we can't pick up. We already tried to pick up Giancarlo Stanton. We didn't get him back in the day. So we'll get Soler and see what happens. But I mean, they're doubling down, tripling down. And just like Hannah said, they got a formidable rotation just for the fact that not even their accolades. You're going to get Logan Webb slinging it from the right side, from here, sinking it. Then the next day, you're going to get Snell from the left side over the top, downhill plane. Then you're going to get Kyle Harris, or then you'll probably get Jordan Hicks running at 100 in on your hands, and then you're going to go Kyle Harrison. So you're not seeing the same look night after night. So it's intriguing to me. It definitely is, and I definitely have them in the playoffs.
Yeah, NL West is stacked. Okay, so let's globalize this conversation then, Hannah. Your overall thoughts on how this offseason ended up. I know there's still a few guys left that will sign, but I think we have a pretty good guess that it's going to be sub $100 million contracts. You know, and it'll be less than we anticipated for people like Jordan Montgomery and Michael Lorenz. Seems like players are quite pissed. We've had a few of them on, the vets, who have kind of unprompted let loose on a terrible free agent experience that they had.
I think we need to understand, well, Boras, like you said, Boras is going to spin this as a win, and maybe all these guys do better when they re-enter the market next year, and Boras has an incredible class of free agents next year, Soto, Bregman, Pete Alonso. So this is not Snell, right?
Chapman.
So this is not about, this to me is not about like, is Boras bad at his job? You said it. He's a great agent. He is a great agent. I'm really curious as to what the factors were, because I think it is one of two things or two of two things, which is, AJ, you and I are talking about this, the teams that we're looking to spend this year maybe weren't the teams that historically are willing to overspend. So, you know, the Mets were taking a step back, the Padres were taking a step back, the Rangers are dealing with the RSN issue, whatever.
That's a weak excuse, by the way.
I know, but that's an excuse. And so I'm curious whether or not it was that, or whether or not it's that waiting is no longer a good tactic. That's what I think is really interesting, because guys did get long-term deals, Yamamoto, Ohtani, but they got them earlier in the offseason. And in the past, Boras has been able to up the leverage the longer he waits, the Machado Harper deals that were signed during spring training. And now we're seeing, it looks like teams want to have that money that costs certainty earlier. And so maybe the strategy needs to adjust in how you approach the offseason, because clearly waiting until right before opening day is not, you're not going to get the teams, even with the pitchers, you're not going to get the teams that panic and overpay because a guy got hurt. So maybe you do have to be more realistic earlier in the offseason. And I'm just interested to see how they, being agents, but also players, kind of adjust to what it is that teams are doing to get themselves that cost certainty.
Some of that's probably CBA related too. And I know there was little uprising yesterday that multiple reporters were talking about, right? So
Yeah.
do you think that a lot of what's gone down in the offseason has led to players that have votes as part of subcommittees and all that, to not get too granular for the audience with the union? Do you think that's why suddenly they're having conversations and talking about, hey, should we make changes on our side? And I'm sure they're already anticipating a nice little battle again and just kind of putting this one in the memory bank for the
Hmm.
next CBA, because you know how baseball works. It's legal battles and CBA fights, and then everything else. This is the
Yes.
top priority, always in our
Yes.
sport for some reason.
So, all right, we should be careful how we talk about this because this is a very developing situation. Jeff
Yes.
Passan had the story overnight, and then Evan Drellick wrote about it. We've looked into this a little bit. That there was an attempted coup, I guess you could say,
Is that the right
at
word?
the union.
Kind of, I guess,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
I mean, they Bruce Meyer, who was the lead negotiator on the most recent CBA negotiation, some players looked to oust him and it seems replace him with Harry Marino, who had headed up the minor leaguers when they organized over the last, half decade, essentially. Okay, so how much of this offseason is a CBA issue? I think probably the players who were disgruntled, who were looking to make this change, were able to leverage the disappointing deals signed by Boras clients into some level of wider dissatisfaction. But I do think that would be a little bit short-sighted because it's tough from a players' union perspective to extract any kind of concessions in these labor negotiations. Just the way that this is, again, trying not to get too granular on the sort of labor front, but just the way that sports negotiations tend to play out. Recently, they have really favored the leagues. Leagues know that they have an entire offseason in which they can enact a lockout, which the owners did last year. And it doesn't hurt their bottom line because there's no games in the offseason anyway. And it puts pressure on the players because free agents can't sign. And then you immediately come to this question of, are players willing to sacrifice games, which is going to look bad to the fans? So just from a leverage perspective, the last 2 decades have really favored leagues when it's come to these negotiations. And until very, very recently, this most recent CBA negotiation was looking like a win for the players, particularly with their stated goals of getting more money to younger players. That pre-arb bonus pool was working. Guys were getting promoted on opening day because of the incentive package that they put in there with draft pick compensation if your guy goes on to win Rookie of the Year. It looked like they had gotten some significant gains. I think I saw the JD Davis sort of kerfuffle was cited. So there are certainly still loopholes and things they should want to address going forward. But I don't think the most recent CBA is in any way to blame for what we're seeing this offseason, which isn't to say players are wrong to be frustrated with how it's played out. I mean, they should certainly try to figure out if there is something happening with teams. People have alluded to the big C word on this show, I know, but that's not a CBA issue necessarily.
Agreed. But my thing is the players are pissed, but they put the people in charge of them. They chose them. Now all of a sudden they want to switch it up right after. And I mean, you said they thought it was a win, so Bruce Meyer was the one that he negotiated that contract for him basically, and he was the lack of a better term, Kratzy, he was the hard ass in the room.
He was the hired gun. I mean, specifically, they hired him because of how disastrous previous CBA negotiations had gone. They thought, we need a seasoned labor professional, someone who has negotiated on behalf of leagues before, and they were happy. I mean,
my thing though is I read Evan Drellick's article. I didn't read Passan's, but so there's 62 executive committee members now, 38 major leaguers, 34 minor leaguers, and Harry Marino was the guy who did the minor league thing, right? So how much of this is the minor leaguers pushing for something that they don't even really know about from the Bruce Meyer end, right? Because first of all, the minors used to never have a union,
right,
in the big leagues, and so it was just separate. But now that they've kind of combined into one, how much is the minor leaguers saying, well, we don't know this Bruce Meyer guy, but we know Harry Marino, so let's just throw him out and see if he can do better
Right.
without really ever having gone through a real negotiation.
Yes, I think what Harry did for the minor leaguers and what the minor leaguers did for themselves was like truly historic. I mean, just generations of baseball players having to put up with horrible minor league conditions to get any kind of unionization, which always seemed like, for years I'd been hearing like that'll never happen. It's too disparate. Guys just want to get promoted. It's a cutthroat industry in the minors. So what they were able to accomplish is huge, but I think you're right. It's not the same thing as extracting financial concession from Rob Manfred, Dan Halem, Morgan Sword, the powers that be at Major League Baseball. The minor leaguers, they did this union for themselves. They agitated, they spoke to the media extensively about how bad things were. They got the government involved in potentially forcing Major League Baseball to pay them more. So that campaign was really successful. But you're right. I think that doesn't necessarily mean the person who headed up that campaign is qualified to lead, these like billion-dollar negotiations when it comes to the majors.
Is this a AJ versus Eric kind of thing? AJ, a superstar, me, kind of more representing the 85 to 90% of big leaguers, not just minor leaguers, but big leaguers too, that never reach AJ's status, never reach 10 years. And as a player, I always felt underrepresented because of stuff like you said. Mm-hmm. Underrepresented. Nope, minor leaguers, it's never a thing. I always heard it from the executive board. No, it's never a thing. We've never represented these guys. And this was during all the way up to COVID. And I was like, this has to change because there's things that are going on there. Is this something that Harry has kind of talked to these guys and like banded together the peasants to topple the higher ups? Because if you remember, when they finally agreed to the CBA, the executive committee, which was represented, the highest executive committee, mm-hmm. which was represented by 8 of 12 Boras clients, rejected the CBA, and then the union ended up pushing it through as a whole.
But if anything, that speaks to the fact that the rank and file were more satisfied with this most recent CBA negotiation than the highest paid players. I mean, I think that was a very interesting factor in how this most recent one played out. I think you just have to assume that the guys who are on the executive bargaining committee are probably always going to have the most extreme stance. They're the guys who have taken up this fight very personally. And they are also just higher paid guys. They're veterans, they're stars. Max Scherzer was one of the most prominent of that committee in this most recent negotiation. So their willingness to kind of hold out probably just reflects a more radical labor stance, whereas the rank and file were like, you got a lot for us in this deal and we don't want to miss games. But if that's the case, those guys, they said they were happy with the deal. They shouldn't now say, actually, we wish we had a different labor negotiator, because I'm sure if they had voted to reject that contract that they eventually accepted, Bruce would have gone along with that and respected that. And he, is more in line with that radical executive committee. So I think the rank and file spoke and they said, we liked the deal you got us in this most recent negotiation.
All right, Hannah, let's move to some upcoming work you've got going on. So give us something that you're writing up as you hit the spring training camps that we should look out for pretty soon.
Okay, so I'm down here working on some reporting for a story about designated hitters, specifically looking at the way that role has changed. It used to be we had the Big Poppies, Edgar Martinez, Nelson Cruz, guys who were true DHs, and the league as a whole has really moved away from that to it being this rotating half off day. And I wanted to look at whether or not that works, because a lot of guys who are good at hitting when they're playing the field are not as good at hitting when they're DHing because they just don't like DHing. So I was talking to guys who have done it, who have gotten better at it, who are good at it from the get-go, just sort of about what is the skill that goes into DHing that maybe fans and executives and people who are like, yeah, you just slot this guy in that day and this other guy in another day. Maybe they don't appreciate the adjustment it takes. And AJ and I were having a lovely conversation about this right before we got on, because I was just like, I don't know, I've never played. The numbers say the guys who don't DH as much aren't as good at it, and the guys who DH more are better at it, but it's hard to tell what's the chicken, what's the egg. And I thought you had some really interesting perspective on, yeah, it is tough to make that transition.
It was hard for me. I DH'd a few times, and the hardest part for me was finding something to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because as a catcher, Crouch, you can speak to this. As a catcher, in between your bats, you're on the field, you're involved in everything, and then you're like, oh shit, I got to go hit. Like, I'm up third this inning, and you're talking to the pitcher, you're talking to the pitching coach, you're talking to everybody about what's going on in the field, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I got to hit, and you don't have a lot of time to think about it. When I was DHing, you have all day to think about it. It was like
too much time.
It was like 4 pinch hits, and I mean, at one point, I told Hannah this, that my best way to stay ready was I would have a beer in between my at bats.
I wish someone had said that to me. Mostly they said, you got to hit the bikes, you got to hit the cage, you got to stay on your feet. I was talking to Andrew McCutcheon, who has sort of made that transition from position player to almost essentially full-time DH. And he said that he first started doing it a lot in the COVID season. And he was like, because there was no one there, he would run out in the half innings. He's like, I would run out like I was going to play the field and then just like, stand in the stands or something just to keep that rhythm going. Because it is tough. It's tough to make that adjustment.
I agree. I couldn't find a routine because it was like, do I hit? Do I get on the bike? Do I run? What do I do? Do I sit in the dugout like with everyone else? And then all of a sudden, man, I got to go hit. It's a hard, and I agree with what you've said, is that the guys who find a routine, find a way to do it and become used to it, that's their job. And then they don't worry about anything else. They're like, all right, I have 4 at-bats and 5 at-bats. I'm going to use these at-bats to the best of my ability. So it's a challenge, and I'm interested to see what you found out from all these, because I saw you talking to Mike Elias, who you were here to interview, and he was like, well, I don't know. I don't know if you're, he wasn't really buying it, but then again, he never really had to do it either. So he doesn't understand the difference especially like in the minor leagues. I never DH in the minor leagues until then you get to the big leagues and they're like, oh, by the way, you're going to face David Price today as the DH. You're not catching. It's a day game after a night game, but we need your bat. And you're like, oh, but I'm still tired from catching 9 innings the night before.
Well, then, okay, I got to ask you, and I want to know you guys' opinion too, because I spoke to him for this story. How impressive is it that Bryce Harper was able to be a great DH, having never done it before and being forced into it by injury? Because he was kind of I was like, I got to know how you did this, because everybody else, there's some adjustment period. How impressed were you just with what he was able to do when he was coming back from injury and DH but didn't play the field? And for like days at a, weeks at a time, he had no chance to go out there and play the field and get back into a rhythm.
I mean, that's impressive, but I hesitate to always go to like the superstars, because those guys, they're on a different level. It's like they have this ability that just goes beyond what a regular player who has to grind it out. And that's what I'm interested to see. Your article is like, where's the GMs, the people who are making these decisions? Like, hey, we're not going to go out and pay $8 million for JD Martinez, who has done this for a long time. We're just going to throw Wyatt Langford, Evan Carter, Corey Seager. We're just going to throw like Adolis Garcia, all those guys into DH and hope it works out. Like, do they feel like that's going to be the most value for them? And that's where I want to know, because I don't think that's it. Because there's a DH out there who can do it. That is a skill. Just like playing first base is a skill, or playing right field is a skill.
All right, cool. So then you'll read the article, because that's what we're looking into. We're looking into what are the factors? Why are teams not paying for it? If teams are not paying for it, then guys don't want to do it because they know they're not going to get paid for it. Like, how did we get to this place where I think something like 13 teams last year got below average offensive output from the DH position? And there's no reason for that. You should have a good hitter DHing every day. That's the whole job.
Yep, I agree. And Hannah, I know you got to catch a flight. We've got Dean Kramer, I think, waiting, right? On the side, yes. So let's get to him.
By the way, I gotta say this for Hannah. Her outfit matches amazingly in the camera. Blue hat, the hair matches the shirt like perfectly. I know it's not the color she's going for, but
it's not. It's faded.
This
is what spring training sun does to my hair. It'll look better on opening day, I promise.
We'll touch up for opening day.
Tomorrow's opening day.
Yeah, that's true. Good call. True. Hannah, good to see you.
Good to see you guys. Thanks. I'm glad this worked out.
Thanks for swinging by.
Hey, everybody. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content.
We're back here every weekday, all year long, so do not miss an episode.
The videos are coming in all day. Here's another video you might enjoy.
Baseball the way it should be covered.